Right, good evening and welcome to Axiom Flux, Season 4, Episode 5, on the 10th of December 1984. No, sorry, 2017. But it might as well be 1984. Topic, or title of the topic, is DSM. Is it a tyrant's tool? Well, I'm going to stick it over to the man who knows all about this tonight, one of our guests, which is the Black Hole Bridger, and he's going to let you know what DSM means. We're hoping to be joined by Jeff as well, and perhaps PJ. But anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, and he's going to tell you what DSM stands for and a little bit about it, and you can make up your own minds. Evening, Paul. All right.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to be here with you all tonight. We're going to be covering the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is used by the psychiatry fraternity. First off, we'll let you know there is no science whatsoever behind the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. In fact, they state themselves in the manual, they state definition of a mental disorder. Although this manual provides classification of mental disorders, it must be admitted that no definition, I repeat that, no definition adequately specifies precise boundaries for the concept of mental disorders. So basically what they're saying is what we're telling you in this book don't mean a jot. And why I'm saying, why I'm asking the question, is it a tyrant's tool, is because mental illness has been used in so many dictatorial countries or tyrannous countries or fascist countries to put people away, which they call disarmables, dissidents, dissenters, people they just do not want to be people to hear. So they drum up a mental disorder and bingo, you're in a psychiatric hospital, prison, or what have you. So we start off with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And when they first brought the first issue out was in 1952. And in the 1952 manual was only 112 disorders. And then there was an update, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 2, and that was brought out 8 years later. Sorry, correction. 16 years later, in 1968. And
Paul,
that manual... Hello?
Paul, can I just, sorry, I don't mean to put you off your thread, but are you sharing the screen?
Not as yet.
Oh, okay. No worries, carry on.
Yeah. Right, let's go back where I was. Yeah, there's 178 disorders in the next manual of the DSM-2, and that was brought out in 1968, which was 16 years later than DSM-1. And in that manual, homosexuality was voted into and out of the DSM for political reasons only. So they're using homosexuality for political reasons. Yeah, not scientific. Let me stress that, not scientific, political reasons. The DSM-3 was then released in the 1970s, and now there is further added to that, now 259 disorders. I think we've got a pattern going here where they keep bringing in new disorders which haven't got no scientific, no empirical experiments done, no blood tests, no fluids, no CT scans, nothing of that sort. It's basically off the top of these people's heads. Yeah, so I'm asking, what disorder have the psychiatrists got? And if the psychiatrists themselves say, we have not got any disorder, well, they come under another definition. Because they've got nothing wrong with them, they're then defined yet again. So they do come under a mental disorder, according to themselves. Yeah. Anyway, that DSM was brought out in the 1970s. And then we had the DSM-4 manual that was brought out in the 1990s. So we're talking, what, nearly 20 years on? And then it jumps up to 374 disorders. So we've got another 120 odd disorders added to the DSM-4. Right? And then the DSM-5 manual, which was published on the 18th of May 2013, which is the last one and the latest one they now use, which supersedes the DM4. And it's just totally not proven whatsoever. And for them to get, what's the word I'm looking for now, to get the people following it and give them some form of credence, they go into the International Classification of Diseases. And now every time they bring out a new manual, straight away, what is in the new DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, yeah, is automatically put into the International Classification of Diseases with no proven scientific proof whatsoever. Yeah, and it's just outrageous that these people and the way they go about it when they have the meetings to see what disorders they're going to put in the DSM. It's just a vote, and the vote is basically who shouts the loudest. So it's like a cattle market auction. This is all the DSM is. There is nothing to it. It's being used in so many ways that affects every single person in most countries, especially countries that are turning tyrannous or becoming dictatorial. Yeah. So what I'll do now is I will share the DSM history with you. I'll share it on the screen for you. Right, this is the American Psychiatric Association, and it's going to tell you about the DSM history. The need for classification of mental disorders has been clear throughout the history of medicine. But until recently, there was little agreement on which disorders should be included and the optimal method for their organisation. Well, they don't know what's going on until they hear the person shouting the loudest, of course. The many different classification systems that were developed over the past 2,000 years, where do they get that from? Have differed in their relative emphasis or on phenomenology, etiology, and of course as defining features. Some systems include only a handful of diagnostic categories. Others include thousands. Moreover, the various systems for categorizing mental disorders have differed with respect to whether their principal objective was for use in clinical, research, or administrative settings. Because the history of classification is too extensive to be summarized here, yes, they don't want to tell you how they're classifying them. This summary focuses only on those aspects and have led directly to the development of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and to the mental disorders sections in the various editions of the International Classification of Diseases. Beginning in the year 2000, work groups were formed, and this is that they're now discussing the DSM-5, which is the latest diagnostic statistical manual of mental illnesses. Beginning in 2000, work groups were formed to create a research agenda for the 5th major revision of the DSM. These work groups generated hundreds of white papers, monographs and journal articles, providing the field with a summary of the state of the science. Science? What science? Relative to psychiatric diagnosis, and letting it known where gaps existed in the current research within those areas. In 2007, APA formed the DSM. That is the American Psychiatric Association, APA by the way, formed the DSM-5 task force to begin revising the manual, as well as 13 work groups focusing on various disordered areas. DSM-5 was published in 2013, but that was the latest one, and they're putting so many well, I would term is absolutely ridiculous things. But then again, I could be put away in a psychiatric hospital for disagreeing with that, I suppose. I will now go and take you onto the psychosis risk syndromes. Yeah. Attenuated psychotic symptom syndromes are in the DSM-5 also. Yes, I was going to go on to the next one. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, is the 2013 update of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the taxonomic and diagnostic tool published by the American Psychiatric Association, APA, in the United States. But it also applies over here, and it is very much worldwide, used worldwide. The DSM serves as a universal authority for psychiatric diagnosis, treatment recommendations, as well as payment by healthcare providers. Now, the payment by healthcare providers, the psychiatric healthcare insurance is now, what, 4 times bigger than all the other medical insurances. And that is what is pushing everybody's premiums up in the normal medical insurances, as well as the mental health care insurances. Anyway, are often determined by the Diagnostic Statistical Manual classifications. So the appearance of a new version has significant practical importance. The DSM-5 was published on May the 18th, 2013, superseding the DSM-4 TR. TR, when I first saw TR, I thought that meant treatment, but it doesn't. It's just text revision, which was published in the year 2000. Development of the new edition began with a conference in 1999 and proceeded with the formation of a task force in 2007, which developed and field tested a variety of new classifications. In most respects, the DSM-5 is not greatly modified from the DSM-4 text revision. However, some significant differences exist between them. Notable changes in the DSM-5 include the reconceptualization of Asperger's syndrome from a distinct disorder to an autism spectrum disorder. The elimination of subtypes of schizophrenia. The deletion of the bereavement exclusion for depressive disorders, the renaming of gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria, along with revised treatment plan, the inclusion of binge eating disorder as a discrete eating disorder. The renaming and reconceptualization of paraphilia to paraphyletic disorders, the removal of the axis system, and the splitting of disorders not otherwise specified in other specified disorders, not otherwise specified, into other specified disorders and unspecified disorders. Can anybody work that one out? In addition, the DSM-5 is the first DSM to use the Arabic numeral instead of Roman numeral in its title, wowee, as well as the first living document version of the DSM. Now, there was only 15 extra disorders added to the number 5 DSM, but what they done was rather crafty, because they knew people moaning about all the new so-called disorders going into DSM. They split a load of other sections up into smaller bits so they could add more that way. So that there is actually a lot more than 15, just 15 added. Various authorities criticised the 5th edition before and after it was formally published. Critics assert, for example, that many DSM-5 revisions or additions lack empirical support, meaning there is no actual scientific test, and over again, repeated over and over again. Inter-rater reliability is low for many disorders. Several sections contain poorly written, confusing, yes, I'm confused, or contradictory information. And the psychiatric drug industry unduly influenced the manual's content. Many of the members of the work group for the DSM-5 had conflicting interests, including ties to the pharmaceutical companies. Various scientists have argued that the DSM-5 forces clinicians to make distinctions that are not supported by solid evidence, distinctions that have major treatment implications, including drug prescriptions and the availability of health insurance coverage. General criticism of the DSM-5 ultimately resulted in a petition signed by many mental health organisations, which called for outside review of the DSM-5, which has not materialised, by the way. So, next we will go to Market Watch. It's an article that was dated on May the 25th, 2013. 15 new mental illnesses in the DM5. Additions to the diagnostic manual include hoarding and caffeine withdrawal. He's having a good slurp there. Caffeine withdrawal. People who are grumpy before they've had their morning coffee may welcome caffeine withdrawal to the DSM-5. Well, they're just miserable devils if they're getting up grumpy. There's no excuse for grumpiness in the morning. As a legitimate mental affliction. A controversial addition, the new diagnosis directly reflects our increasing dependence on caffeine. I'm not dependent on caffeine. From the proliferation of Starbucks outlets to the growing array of non-coffee energy drinks and caffeine-injected alcohol beverages. Caffeine is invading our society more and more. Alan Bundy, a psychiatrist who helped develop the DSM-5, said at a 211 industry symposium, according to reports, caffeine withdrawal was included in an appendix of the DSM-4 as a condition needing further study. But some psychiatrists worry that caffeine withdrawal may be an easy way to clinically label symptoms such as headaches, sleep disturbances, and moodiness, at the cost of missing a serious pathological disorder. The real problem for psychiatrists is, will they be able to have time with the patient to distinguish between caffeine withdrawal and the kind of uneasiness and headaches that come from an encounter they might have had in their life experiences? Now, I know for a certain fact, after my head injury, I had to go and see a psychiatrist, and no sooner I walked in his office, he was picking up a DSM and looking for what drugs he could give me. It was absolutely unbelievable. And I don't think I was in there any more than 5 minutes. It was absolutely ridiculous. It's just another way for them quickly to push drugs on behalf of the pharmaceutical companies. And noting the root word for pharmaceutical is pharma, which is pharmakia, which is witchcraft. That's just a side note, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go on to the next article. Right, this is the medical examiner, and abnormal is the new normal. Why will half the US population have a diagnosable mental disorder? Beware the DSM-5, the soon-to-be released, the 5th edition of the Psychiatric Bible. Well, it's already here. It's been here since the 2013. So this article must have been 2013 or pre-2013 before the actual DSM-5 was actually released. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, yours will probably be greater than 50% according to the new manual that you'll have a mental disorder in your lifetime. Although fewer than 6% of American adults will have a severe mental illness in a given year, according to a 2005 study, many more than a quarter each year, will have some diagnosable mental disorder. That's a lot of people, almost 50% of Americans, 46.4% to be exact, will have a diagnosable mental illness in their lifetimes, based on the previous edition, the DSM-4. And the new manual will likely make it even easier to get a diagnosis. If we think of having a diagnosable mental illness as being under a tent, the tent seems pretty big, huge in fact. How did it happen that half of us will develop a mental illness? Has this always been true? And we just didn't realise how sick we were? We didn't realise we were under the tent? Or we were mentally less healthy than the generation ago? What about a third explanation? That we are in a mental illness, psychological states that were previously considered normal, albeit unusual, making the tent bigger. The answer appears to be all three. So it don't matter how big they make this tent's just going to keep growing in stature. Every time they bring out a new DSM, there'll be more and more in there to catch everybody in their net, so they can drug push on behalf of the pharmaceutical companies with these bogus disorders. Bogus, with no empirical, proven scientific reasoning, experiments, etc. No body fluids taken, no CAT scans, nothing, absolutely nothing. A gentleman, a so-called expert, was asked in the court of law what actual tests he'd done, bodily fluids and this, that, and the lawyer asked him all the different variations of tests, and he answered none. Yet he was supposed to be an expert. So much for experts, eh? Right, Psikhushka. Now, here we go. Psikhushka is a Russian ironic diminutive for psychiatric hospital. In Russia, the word entered everyday vocabulary. This word has been occasionally used in English, Since the Soviet dissident movement and diaspora community, the West used the term in the Soviet Union. Psychiatric hospitals were often used by the authorities as prisons in order to isolate political prisoners from the rest of society, discredit their ideas, and break them physically and mentally. As such, psikhushkas were considered a form of torture. The official explanation was that no sane person would be against socialism. Psikhushkas were already in use by the end of the 1940s, continuing into the Khrushchev period of the 1960s. On April the 29th, 1968, the head of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, submitted to the Central Committee of CPSU a plan for the creation of a network of psikhushkas. So here come in all the psychiatric hospitals / prisons / gulags. The official Soviet psychiatric science came up with the definition of sluggish schizophrenia, a special form of the illness that supposedly affects only the person's social behavior with no trace of other traits. Most frequently, ideas about a struggle for truth and justice are formed by personalities with a paranoid structure. According to the Moscow Subsky Institute professors, some of them had high rank in the MVD, which is the medical veterinarian doctors, such as the infamous Daniel Luntz, who was characterized by Viktor Nipolov as no better than a criminal doctor who performed inhuman experiments on the prisoners in Nazi concentration camps. So we can see the how it was being used in Russia, which was a totalitarian system. Any kind of dissenters, any kind of person that disagreed with the government, they had a mental disorder all of a sudden, and they were sent for brainwashing. If the brainwashing failed, they were then sent to the gulags, and many was never seen again once they were sent to the gulags. And the gulags were placed up in northern Siberia, where temperatures went to such a low degree, many didn't survive whatsoever, and they were more or less starved and worked to the bone. Cases of political abuse of psychiatry in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, a systematic political abuse of psychiatry took place and was based on the interpretation of political dissent as a psychiatric problem. It was called psychopathological mechanisms of dissent. During the leadership of General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev, psychiatry was used as a tool to eliminate political opponents, in brackets, descendants, or basically anybody who disagreed with the government, who openly expressed beliefs that contradicted official dogma. We're getting a lot of that in this country just lately, so much official dogma. And the new term that David Cameron come out with, people that disagree with the government, extremists. We're gonna, I've got a bit for that later. The term philosophical intoxication was widely used to diagnose mental disorders in cases where people disagreed with leaders and made them the target of criticism that used the writings by Karl Marx, etc., etc. Along with a system of diagnosing mental illness developed by academia, Andrei Shesnevsky created the very preconditions under which non-standard beliefs could easily be transformed into a criminal case. And it in its turn into a psychiatric diagnosis, anti-Soviet political behaviour, in particular being outspoken in opposition to the authorities, demonstrating for reform, writing books, were defined in some persons as being simultaneously a criminal act, a symptom, delusion, reformist, and a diagnosis of sluggish schizophrenia within the boundaries of the diagnostic category. The systems of pessimism, poor social adaptation, shall I say, and conflict with authorities were themselves sufficient for a form and diagnosis of sluggish schizophrenia. The process of psychiatric incarceration was instigated by attempts to emigrate, distribution or possession of prohibited documents or books, participation in civil rights actions and demonstrations, and involvement in forbidden religious activity. The religious faith of prisoners, including well-educated former atheists who adopted a religion, was determined to be a form of mental illness that needed to be cured. The KGB routinely sent dissidents to psychiatrists for diagnosis to avoid embarrassing public trials and to discredit dissidents as a product of ill minds. Formerly highly classified government documents published after the dissolution of the Soviet Union demonstrate that the authorities used psychiatry as a tool to suppress dissent. So you can see how the DSM is really shaping up to be used by dictators or tyrants, and it's not just being shaping up, it is being used already around different parts of the world. The next article I have for you is from IO9, and was actually put out on the 9th of April 2012. How the Soviets used their own twisted version of psychiatry to suppress political dissent. Over the course of its 69-year history, the Soviet Union was notorious for its heavy-handed suppression of political dissent, most infamously through its use of the Siberian gulags. But it was during the 1960s and the 1970s that the Communist Party took their intolerance for ideological deviance to extremes by diagnosing and institutionalizing so-called counter-revolutionaries with mental illness. It was a frightening episode in Soviet history in which perfectly healthy citizens could be deemed psychotic simply on account of their political views. And indeed, what better way to deal with activists and naysayers than to diagnose them as being mentally unstable, dissenters who are often seen as both a burden and a threat to the system, could be easily discredited and detained. Moreover, it served as a powerful and disturbing way to convince the masses that they needed to adhere to the party line, and that any deviant thinking was surely a sign of mental instability. As Nikita Khrushchev noted in 1959, it should be impossible for people in a communist society to have anti-communist consciousness, and of those who might start calling for opposition to communism on this basis, we can say that clearly their mental state is not normal. Consequently, it was around this time that Soviet definitions of mental disease were expanded to include political disobedience. But in the end, all of it ever amounted to was a form of political abuse and repression. Anti-Soviet activists were not mentally ill, but instead the victims of politically inspired pseudoscience and the misuse of psychiatric diagnosis. politically defined madness. The advent of Soviet psycho prisons coincided with the rise in power and influence of the KGB. For those that are not in the know, the KGB was the Soviet Union's special police, the infamous secret service wing of the Communist Party. They started taking interest in medicine as a potential instrument of control as early as 1948 under the Stalin regime. The use of gulags was starting to fall out of favour. So it was around this time that the high-ranking KGB officer, Andrei Vyshensky, excuse my pronunciations of these words, Vyshensky, ordered the use of psychiatry as a way to both quash dissent and still send a message to any would-be activists. Indeed, psychiatry had great potential as a control mechanism, more so than other areas of medicine. The Communist Party was eager to take advantage. They knew that a diagnosis of mental illness could confer them broad powers by allowing them to detain persons against their will, conduct therapy, all while proclaiming it to be within the interests of the patient and the broadest interests of society. Called Psikhushkas, Soviet psychiatric wards were a place where dissenters could be both confined and treated for their perceived conditions. Psikhushkas soon became an integral part of the larger psychiatric system, in which genuine psychiatric science worked in parallel with the politically imposed version. To a degree, it became part of a two-tiered system, in which psychiatry was used as a form of political repression, primarily operating out of Moscow Institute for Forensic Psychiatry, and a more genuine psychiatry as practiced in the Leningrad Psychological Institute. Once in full swing, the new system became integrated in hundreds of hospitals across the Soviet Union. The campaign adopted a greater sense of mission during the late 1960s, where open dissent started to become more commonplace, most notably through the agitation of such thinkers and activists as Alexander Solzhenitsyn, excuse me, and Andrei Sakharov, KBG chairman, Yuri Andropov, who went on to become premier, called for a renewed struggle against dissidents and their imperialist masters. To that end, he outlined and implemented a plan that went into effect in 1969, looking to wipe out political dissent in the Soviet Union once and for all. Andropov made sure that psychiatry would continue to use as a tool in the struggle. Specifically, he issued a decree on measures for preventing dangerous behaviours, Axiom brackets, on the part of mentally ill persons. Consequently, psychiatrists were both empowered and expected to diagnose and confine anyone who fit the description of a political agitator. Doctors were even told to haul or entrap suspected dissidents, thus making them not only de facto arresting officers, but interrogators as well. Psychiatrists were compelled to come up with diagnoses, allowing the police and the state to forego inconveniences such as due process and court judgments, such they were at the time. So you can see how it's been implemented by tyrants in a dictatorship, and it does not take long for a country to fall into a dictatorship once all the infrastructure is put in place. And the DSM, especially the DSM-5, is one of those main posts in their structure.
Yeah, it's a scary proposition, isn't it? What's going on? You can see what's going on blatantly, Paul. I'll tell you one thing I've noticed. I've seen an article about ADHD. Have you heard of ADHD?
Yeah,
which
attention deficit hyperactive disorder.
That's the one. Yeah, I've seen an article about it, and they said that the bloke who invented it, he admitted to it on his deathbed that it was just fabricated, totally fabricated. I mean, when we were kids, we used to sort of look out the window. We used to get bored with what the teacher was, going on about. So we looked out the window and we, did a bit of daydreaming and stuff. That later became called ADHD, and then ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. Same thing. That's just it's a normal part of your childhood. Kids do that. Kids have got a short attention span. Young children that they sort of can concentrate for a small amount of time and then they lose interest, which is perfectly normal. Of course, they've used that as an excuse to push drugs like Ritalin, which has got countless side effects and causes all sorts of health problems.
Well, actually, side effects are not side effects; they are the effects.
Yeah, effects rather than side effects. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly, this is the sort of thing that they do. They create all sorts of illnesses so that we can all be deemed mad. It's like they create all sorts of legislation for the reason that we can all be found guilty of something, so that they can push their corrupt system on us one way.
Exactly. And the DSM is one of the main planks of this tyrannous regime coming into power. Is one of its main structures.
Yeah.
And a child is a child. If they fidget, that's a child. If they run about, that's a child. If they're a bit awkward, that's a child.
Hey,
and as for adults, they've got so many disorders for adults, all being down or shyness, this, that, and the other. Everybody goes through that during the course of their lifetime. Ups and downs, that's what life is. And you don't get to appreciate the ups if you don't have the downs, or vice versa.
That's very, well said that. Yeah, absolutely. For every force, there's an equal and opposite force. So you're going to get ups, you're going to get downs. Everybody's going to have good days and bad days. But, if they want to classify that as a mental illness, it's like sooner or later, they're going to classify thinking as a mental illness.
Oh, yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me, in which case we'll all be deemed mad.
Yeah, it'd be a case of thinking when you weren't supposed to be thinking, because they would do you for not thinking when you should have been thinking. So you'll be on a hot tin roof all the time, not knowing which way to swivel, because you don't know which way they're going to get you.
Exactly, mate. You can see where he's going. Like, we'll all be deemed completely mad, so we can be put in some form of incarceration and then paid sort of 10p an hour for slavery.
Yeah.
They'll probably turn it into a work gulag or something,
Well, I'm covering quite... Yeah, sorry, go on. I thought you... I'm covering quite a bit of the political abuse of psychiatry in Russia, because that is where a lot of people have heard of this going on. But it's not just Russia. I'm going to be covering other countries as well that are using this system as their plank for their tyrannous activities.
Well,
anyway,
so far, Paul, from what you've given me so far, I think if you haven't got a disorder, you are raving mad.
There is a condition for that as well in the DSM. Yeah, that's why I said if the psychiatrists say they haven't got a disorder, well, they're covered by their own manual that they've got a disorder, because, they have got something wrong with them according to their manual.
You're not following the orders. You're disorder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Check this out. I seen something about. I've got an article here, right? I'll just read out one section on it. It's basically. Have a listen to this. Hang on a sec. Let's just scroll back up. 10 commonly abused psychology words and what they really mean. And you've got OCD is the first one, obsessive compulsive disorder. Many people use OCD to mean a desire to be tidy and keep things in order. Alphabetizing your bookshelf, my OCD kicked in. Tupperware always neatly stacked. I'm a little OCD about my kitchen, one tile out of place on the floor. This will drive people with OCD crazy, right? But listen to this, right? But OCD is not just a desire for order. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, says that OCD obsessions are intrusive and unwanted, and its compulsions are aimed at preventing or reducing anxiety or distress, or preventing some dreaded event or situation, but are not connected in a realistic way with what they're supposed to prevent, or are clearly excessive. They take up a lot of time or interfere badly with life. All right, and DSM-5 distinguishes between OCD and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. However, OCPD involves extreme versions of traits you probably recognize in some people. Extreme preoccupation with rules and orders to the extent that the major point of the activity is lost. Perfectionism that interferes with task completion. Excessive devotion to work, extreme inflexibility, miserliness, and what we often call control freak behavior. If you know someone who is so stuck on getting something exactly right that it never gets done, or other things get ruined entirely, or someone who insists on rules or moral principles to the point of hurtfulness or destructiveness, that person may have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. A key point is that it's a personality disorder. People with personality disorders are generally difficult to deal with, but they see other people as the problem. If you just like to have everything tidy, you probably don't have OCPD, and you certainly don't have OCD. But the point I was going to make there was, who is it who wants order more than anything? The bloody governments. They're the ones that they're control freaks.
Control freaks.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Jeff, because Vietnam, California is on the chat has put sycophancy is a mental health disorder. Have a look in that DM5, Paul. Tell me if you can find it in there.
Right.
Yeah, so actually I'd be classed under that because I'm a perfectionist. If I do something, I do it to the best of my ability.
Well, you know, in the old days,
that's a good thing, is it? Not to do something to the best of your ability.
Exactly. Things, I mean, in the workplace, I mean, people were perfectionists in the old days. People went out of their way to do things to a sort of level of quality, but nowadays everything's mass-produced rubbish. So, you know, this is the way the world's going, isn't it?
And the byproduct, what they're doing is they're trying to turn us into a load of useless slobs that have got no control over anything. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, there's 10 of these things that are abused, 10 of these words. Here, I'll run through them quickly. I won't give you the read up on them, but the first one was OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. The second one is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The third one is narcissist. The fourth is manic depressive bipolar, stroke bipolar. The fifth is schizophrenia. The sixth is paranoid. The seventh is psychotic. 8 is psychopath. 9 is insane, and 10 is crazy. These are all words.
Well, I didn't hear you mention sycophant, and for those that aren't aware of that word, it's of a person or of a behaviour. It's praising people in authority in a way that is not sincere, usually in order to get some advantage from them.
Yeah, sycophants.
Yeah.
It's their way of trying to make us into mindless blobs and try not to get us to think for ourselves. Because when you do something to a perfection, you think about doing it to the absolute best possibility you can get. Yeah, so you're thinking about things. They don't want us thinking. We're dangerous to them if we're thinking.
I've had somebody call me OCD before, and I'll tell you why, because I put things in the same place so that I can put my hands on them and find them easier. It's like keys, for example. I put them all in exactly the same place, every time. Somebody said to me, "You've got OCD, Jeff." And I said, "No, I haven't." I said, "The reason I do it is because I don't have to expend energy thinking about where I've put it, because I put it in the same place every time, so I know I can find it straight away."
Exactly.
And he's the very same person that told me that I was OCD. He's a person that loses his keys every 5 minutes and locks himself out of his own place, like, you know.
Yeah, so me being in the Navy, they were teaching me a mental disorder to put everything in its correct place so everybody knew where to get it.
Well, now I know. Let me just say, now I know where this, like, healthy eating is a mental disorder. Now I know where that originates. I've always, you know, found it a bit fascinating where this comes from, this sort of stuff. But after you demonstrating what you've just done tonight, Paul.
Yeah, I've still got a bit more to go, actually.
Oh, brilliant.
But anyway, yeah, political abuse of psychiatry, just a quick historical overview here. And this is from the Oxford Academic is about schizophrenia bulletin here. It's political abuse of psychiatry and historical overview. The abstract, the use of psychiatry for political purposes, note for political purposes, has been a major subject of debate within the world of psychiatric community during the second half of the 20th century. The issue became prominent in the 1970s and the 1980s due to the systematic political abuse of psychiatry in the Soviet Union, where approximately 1/3 of the political prisoners were locked up in psychiatric hospitals. The issue caused a major rift within the World Psychiatric Association, from which the Soviets were forced to withdraw in 1983. They returned conditionally in 1989. Political abuse of psychiatry took also place in other socialist countries on a systematic scale in Romania. And during the first decade of the 21st century, it became clear that systematic political abuse of psychiatry is also happening in the People's Republic of China. The article discusses the historical background to these abuses and concludes that the issue had a major impact on the development of the concepts regarding medical ethics and the professional responsibility of physicians. Well, I would like to see a bit more responsibility coming from these physicians, because they're not following their Hippocratic oath, are they?
Well, when it says psychiatry, they should just replace it to gaslighting, because that's all it is.
Yeah. Time and again, human rights and mental health organisations receive reports on cases of abuse of psychiatry for political purposes. The fact that these reports come from a wide range of countries shows that there is an ongoing tension between politics and psychiatry, and that the opportunity to use psychiatry as a means to stifle opponents or solve conflicts is an appealing one, not only to the dictatorial regimes, but also to well-established democratic societies. Even the defrocked democratic societies like the UK. Yeah, but that's just that bit on that one. I've still got quite a bit to go, lads. This is the New York Times magazine, the world of Soviet psychiatry. I just come down to this phrase here. Yeah, there is, in fact, little of what Americans know as psychotherapy in the Soviet psychiatry, nor is that state of affairs accidental. Soviet distrust of psychotherapy has been strong ever since the 1930s, when the ideas of Sigmund Freud, the originator of insight-orientated talk therapies, were declared inconsistent with Marxist science. So this is where dogma and psychiatry and politics all intermingle. It's being used purposefully.
Yeah, but it's the intermingle is, because people like Carl Jung, you look at some of his stuff, and that is just, you know, truly astonishing work. What he's got, not many people have actually looked into it. So you can't really knock the person. It's decent. It seems to be, you know, a collection of people, individuals that are just like using this stuff.
Yeah, well, psychiatry originally originated from people, I forget what they called it, was it phenology or something, where they used to look at a man's skull and tell by bumps on the heads of that whether he's a criminal or whether he's a degenerate. It's so, this is what's still going on today with them getting things put in the DSM. Look, it's just like being at a cow auction.
So would these ones be equivalent to the ones that would like tie your fingers and thumbs together and chuck you in water?
Sorry, can you say that one again?
Would these be the ones to decide and come out with the ways of like tying your fingers and your toes, to your thumbs and your toes together, and putting you in some water to see if you was a witch?
Yeah. But
Right.
then again, when you look at who they're working with, the pharmaceutical companies, which derives from pharmakia, which is witchcraft. So
Exactly.
they're all playing with each other, and that they're using us for their rituals. But anyway, this next one here.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because it were interesting when you said, like earlier, you mentioned it comes from witchcraft, and I thought, well, because I've been told, I don't know as much as you do, Paul, with this DSM-5, but I do know it's not just an individual; it's throughout health, it's throughout the law, the schools, everything. So you can see, you know, if back in the day they would have done such a thing as tying your thumbs and your toes together to see if you're a witch or not, as a so-called being justice, which is again through your law. So if they can like have that sort of effect back then it just shows you what power it's got today.
Yeah, I've just put YouTube on, PJ, and it don't seem as if I've got any volume here playing through it. It's only 15 seconds long, but yeah. Can you hear anything you're in?
No, I can't get anything on my side.
No, we'll leave that one then. It was just basically he was on about conspiracy theories. But what I was getting to here was how they get on a world platform like the UN General Assembly and come out with things like conspiracy theories, you know, don't listen to them, this, that and the other. And the reason I showed that is because basically we've been called conspiracy theorists, and then we get David Cameron telling
peddling lies. Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, and then we get David Cameron. I'll see whether there's any volume on this one, so I'll play this one through. No volume, but basically David Cameron saying is we should deal with violent extremists and non-violent extremists the same, and this is part of the linking into them using the DSM. We're going to be treated the same because if we're an extremist, there's something medically wrong with us because we're not agreeing with the government. This is basically what David Cameron's saying.
This is what, you know, goes in and out at Bilderberg and stuff like that. This is what talked about in them sort of places.
See, I mean, this was a couple of years ago, and they're prepping the people. They're prepping people ready for when they want to bring in their playing their magic games, you know, their witchcraft. Because when you look at it, they're putting spells on people by what they're saying, and they have to put it in the form of writing. Therefore, it's a spell.
Well, that's it. It's like if you don't know you're crazy yourself, then you're crazy.
Yeah. I don't know why there was no volume coming through them, but yeah, I think you get what I'm getting at, don't you? Here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And the next one is it's just a short video on the gulags. It's only just under 3 minutes long. Hopefully there's going to be some volume here, but you can actually see through the picture itself how awful it was.
Many days, many lives. Takes you inside the brutal labor concentration camps and internal exile, an institution called the Gulag, to which the Soviet Union subjected millions of its citizens. Gulag prisoners perform dangerous physical labor in the mines, forests, and construction sites of the harshest inhabited climates on Earth. Starvation, food rations, rampant disease and violence from guards as well as other prisoners tormented the Gulag prisoners' daily existence. Soviet authorities found the Gulag a useful tool to neutralize and often physically destroy all real or imagined opposition to the Communist Party's dictatorship. Yet it also served as the main Soviet penal system, punishing the same type of criminals incarcerated in virtually any country. Soviet authorities utilized the Gulag as the key weapon in their battle to rehabilitate or destroy criminals, class enemies, and political opponents once and for all, while simultaneously accomplishing the economic goal of opening remote regions to resource exploitation. Although camps existed from the time of the 1917 Russian Revolution itself, they only became the home to millions of prisoners in the early 1930s under the rule of Joseph Stalin, and they declined precipitously after his death in 1953. Though smaller and more focused on serious criminals, forced labor camps for political prisoners lasted into the late 1980s when reformer Mikhail Gorbachev led the Soviet Union. Soviet dissidents made up an important but small portion of the post-Stalin camp population. The last camp for political prisoners outside of Perm, Russia was closed in 1988 and has since been turned into a historic site in Gulag Museum. In the Stalin era, some 18 million people passed through the prisons and camps of the Gulag, and perhaps another 6 or 7 million were sent into exile. More than 1.5 million prisoners died in the Gulag at the hands of their own government. Even those who survived had their lives destroyed by this brutal institution. In the exhibit that follows, Gulag, Many Days, Many Lives, you will be assigned one former Gulag prisoner to accompany you through your exploration of life in this brutal institution. As you go from section to section, you will learn not only of the general story of this horrific institution, but you will also see the life story and the experiences of this individual unfold before you. After your trip through the exhibit, we invite you on a virtual visit to the Gulag Museum at Perm 36.
And they were the gulags that the prisoners were sent to.
Gulag,
so
many
sorry.
days, many lives.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a very pretty thing, and many didn't see normal life again once they were sent to the gulags, and many were never seen again. But the political abuse of psychiatry is manifold. It's in many countries. It's in Canada, it's in China, Cuba, India, Japan, Germany, Norway, Romania, Russia. Just to mention a few, it's in Czechoslovakia, it's in Africa, even in Africa. It's, let's put you on this one for Africa. Right, this is the Daily Mail report, and the date of this report was the 4th of November 2015. Startling images of abuses inside Africa's psychiatric prisons, mentally ill patients chained up by their ankles in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, force-fed tranquilizers and beaten. Mentally ill patients in Somaliland, Northeast Africa, chained up and beaten, a human rights study reveals. Report found alarmingly high levels of mental health down to violence of civil war, poverty and addiction to drugs. Patients forced into hospitals where they are shackled by their ankles, force-fed medication and beaten by guards. They are among the thousands of mental health sufferers locked up in cruel institutions and prisons across Africa / the world. Same cruelty occurs in nations of South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Kenya and Nigeria. It is so prolific, it's worldwide. This is the abuse that psychiatry is getting away with under the guise of we're helping you, or we're doing it for the benefit of the society as a whole. You know, always giving you the pros, never telling you the cons. here's another thing which you have to be really careful of when you're reading different things. This is the BMC psychiatry, yeah? Now, what would any of you think BMC means?
Well, I know, because it says it at the top. It's Biomedical Central or something.
Oh yeah, you found it. But most people would look at that and think, oh, that's British Medical Council. Most people would look at it straight away, because most people look at the big writing and not the small writing. But you've seen it straight away. You would do. But it's not. It's just not a pro. It's just not a proven. Well, I just haven't got time for psychiatry. Just not got the time of day for them, because they're just bleeding people dry. They're getting money for old rope for telling basically lies.
I got a name for psychiatrists, Paul. I call them trick cyclists.
Trick cyclists. Well, with me, they're the black magicians, mate. They're the black magicians.
Yeah.
Fighters to me.
Has any of you ever seen the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
I haven't seen it all, but yeah, I've seen bits of it.
Brilliant film, yeah.
Brilliant film with Jack Nicholson, where he goes in as a perfectly normal guy into a mental hospital to be assessed. I think he's trying to get out of his work detail or something. So he made out he was mad. They put him in a loony asylum, and basically they ended up giving him electric shock treatment, and eventually they lobotomized him. So you go in as a perfectly normal person, and you end up like, totally mad.
Yeah, it's a bit like this Matrix. I've seen that, Jeff. Another film, 12 Monkeys. I don't know if you've seen that.
12 Monkeys. I've heard of it. I don't know if I might have seen it. I'm not sure, but gives you a good idea of what they used to do, the sort of atrocities that they used to carry out on patients in the past. And they did literally. They used to give them electric shock treatment, and lobotomize them, and all this sort of stuff. Absolutely appalling that these people are given.
As I say, it's still worldwide. I mean, this article here is from the MDAC, which is the Mental Disability Advocacy Centre, and this is only the 30th of June 2014. What, 3 years, just over 3.5 years ago? Right. Torture and ill treatment banned under international law, still evident in the Czech Republic psychiatric hospitals. It's still going on today.
Incredible.
And it's a bogus. It's bogus. Psychiatric. It's bogus. The whole lot of it.
Yeah, it sounds like the whole system is used for, to stifle dissent and basically, get them to sell their pathetic drugs. It's capitalism, isn't it? It's a form of, it's created by capitalism originally, but is used for other nefarious purposes.
Yeah, but it's going to become very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be more and more prevalent, because we are marching towards a totalitarian state in this country, when our government does not even recognise that the people voted out of Brexit means out. Not bring up a pesco that takes us in even deeper.
Well, apparently, is from what I've seen lately about Brexit, is going to be it's going to be in name only. Brexit will only be Brexit in name only. Yeah.
Well, I phrased it this way.
Well,
they made the name up Brexit. So if you make a name up, you can then put whatever definition you like to that, because you made it up.
Yeah, well, I think the real word should be bullshit, not Brexit, but still.
Yeah, it is basically. If you seem to like one out of you,
I'll open it up to everybody. What anybody else wants to say now? I think I've done my little rant and rave.
Yeah, good that, Paul.
Very good, Paul. I'd like to say one thing with the pictures of the Gulag and the salt mines in Russia and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There is some evidence and some theories that Stalin was an Ashkenazi Jew.
Well, that's don't surprise me.
And we know that communism and Bolshevism came from
Ashkenazi.
Well, it was financed by the American Jewry and the Ashkenazi bankers.
Yeah.
And the whole idea, I put it, the whole idea of socialism is an Ashkenazi Jewish plan. I could stretch it that far. And because socialism, even Lenin, I think, said socialism is communism, but put in a way to deceive people. But anyway, of course, you still have the same people in control today, Wall Street, and what's happening in the world today. It's still owned by the same evil lot that would have brought around those things in those days. So all of this, I think, there's good evidence to point in one direction, and we're still not free of it today. There we are.
But say, as far as I can see, stuff, all the evidence is pointing to a tyrant's tool.
Yes, I guess, like you say, it definitely is. I think psychiatry and all that type of thing is just basically like everything else in this world, that disorder and all this.
Yeah. And they've been prepping us over decades. So when they finally do it, we just slip into it. Oh, that's normal, but it's not normal.
Well, the thing is, you challenge the state or the powers that be, they're going to want to either shove you in a jail, and if they can't shove you in a jail, they'll shove you in a mental home. Anything to shut you up, basically. If you're locked away, well, you're effectively shut up, aren't you? It's
yeah. And if they can put the label on you, you're mental, well, nobody's going to listen to you then.
Yeah, it's another.
Yeah. They're going to stick you in a psychiatric gulag.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've already got a psychiatric gulag. It's called political correctness, but that's just another aspect on it. But
another one of the famous tools that they'd use in communist Russia, very much so, political correctness. But it all leads to one way, doesn't it? That if you dissent, you've got a disorder. And yeah, I agree with that. Disorder means not obeying orders. And I think you've got to be raving mad to obey orders, personally, because it doesn't make any sense,
Definitely, 100%. It's all an attack on freedom of speech, whichever way you look at it. They're doing everything they can to shut us up.
Yeah.
One way or another. They don't want us spreading information. They don't want us spreading the truth. And people, because they're frightened of revolution, they're frightened of a rising up of the people, and they just want to keep their control system going. It's all about control. That's what government means. To govern is to control. And ment is mental control. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it's all about. It's always ever been about, with as far as government's concerned and things like that. They don't want anybody rocking the boat. They want their political system to carry on just as they're making a lot of money out of it.
Yeah. I just want to say that I think all you're insubordinate, and you should just start, obeying authority.
Send us to the salt mines. Send them to the salt mines.
No. So as I say, I'm leaving it open to all the listeners and the viewers to. I'll put the question to them now. I'll give them the evidence. I'll leave it with them.
Well, it's basically, to summarise it off, it's either a tyrant's tool or everybody's just mentally ill.
It's a multi reason thing, and it's pharmaceuticals as well. There's massive money in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Biggest industries that we've got in the UK are pharmaceuticals and the weapons trade and things like that, and financial products. That's the three biggest things that Britain deals with, basically. So you know, if they can,
and they're all control mechanisms for a certain type of people that have had the control from behind the curtain, who don't like to reveal themselves, but they've always been there for quite a long time. 3,000 years, 4,000. Yes.
If you look at atrocities throughout history, I mean, I said something to you the other day, Stav, I don't know if you remember. There are 5 countries that are the biggest arms dealers in the world. And that is the UK, the USA, France, China, and Russia. They're also the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council.
Isn't that strange?
I would say one of the biggest investors, and they're not aware of it, are people who pay council tax.
Yeah.
True, very true.
Yeah.
We're paying for our own,
Paul, that was great.
We're paying for our own demise, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we certainly are.
And they're laughing their socks off because we're paying for it.
Exactly. That's how sick the society is that we live in. People think that this is a civilized society. And you see people that run around in loincloths in sort of you know, what we would consider backward countries are probably more civilized and in tune with nature than we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what not going off topic at all, but basically, people should get ready for human beings to battle against machines. It's got to be analog, the future, because AI is set to control most of us, not the controllers, but us. So get ready for that one. Analog versus digital. I know what I'm made of, and I know what I operate on, and it certainly ain't digital.
Yeah, I'm analog, mate.
Well, that'll come under another topic another week under singularity, I think, which I've got prepared. But yeah, brilliant, Paul. Well done for that. That's excellent. Learnt a lot. You've, you know, just clarified a few things where.
Well, hopefully, I've stimulated a bit of thought amongst people.
Yeah,
that's all we can do at the end of the day is put the information out there and you know, plant the seeds of truth and let it take root by itself in people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the articles, Paul, especially when you were going back to the Gulag, the Russian days, and the pictures and that, because you don't see too much of that on alternative media.
No.
I don't like to show it sometimes. I don't know why, but I'd like to see.
You do know why, Steph.
I think we should go back and rake it all over and bring it all up, because they're changing the dictionaries and the wordings before 2009, I think it is, and we need to bring that back, because some people are actually washing it with this Mandela effect and all the rest of it. But you know, let's bring it all up, because I think it needs to be aired.
Why would they take the word acorn out of the dictionary? Why would they take the word willow? As in the tree, willow. Why would they take that out?
Is pinecone still in?
Say again? Because it's pinecone.
No, is pinecone still in? Have they removed that?
Yeah. Anybody that's actually interested, if they want to watch a good video on psychiatry, it's called the DSM, Psychiatry's Deadliest Scam. We put it on in the description box, and if you want to look also, the partners in crime with the psychiatry is the pharmaceuticals, and I've got a link for that as well, a film for that, and it's called Making a Killing: The Untold Story of Psychotropic Drugging.
Going back to what you were saying about changing the definitions of words, that reminds me of something that John Harris said in his video, It's an Illusion, where he said about the Black's Law Dictionary, and he said you've had like about 6 revisions of this dictionary or something, and he said, well, why would somebody revise a dictionary? Because a word means a word and it never changes.
And the root word is always the same.
Yeah, exactly. The etymology.
Well, unless it can't keep up with times, and for reasons that we obviously know, then there'd be no other reason to change a meaning of a word, would there?
No, I think it's basically to abuse the system. That's the way I would see it myself. Because
You just muted yourself, Fred.
But if you've redefined the wording of something, it can allow all sorts of abuses to take place, in my opinion. But that's just me. But,
and hence why they keep redefining words and renaming them. It's a sense of it's a type of rebranding. It's like if a company's done something really bad and they want to get away from everybody looking at them, they change the name. They rebrand. Yeah. That's the way to do it.
Well, this is the thing with the English language, isn't it? There's so many different ambiguous terms and words with multiple meanings and, you know, all this sort of stuff. That the English language has become way too complex for what it is. You know, you could have a much simpler language system without so many words. You wouldn't need that many words. I mean, we've got something like 400,000 words in the English dictionary, and they're adding about 3,000 new words every year or something like that.
Well, no wonder why Chinese say like English language is hardest to learn.
Oh, it's becoming like the DSM then. They keep adding more and more.
And that's coming from the Mandarin Chinese, is it? Bloody hell, their language.
Yeah, that's like every Chinese person.
Their language is complex enough.
They'll all say the same, yeah, it's English is the hardest. Well, not just Chinese, in many parts of the world all say that English is the hardest, not difficult language to learn. So when we struggle like with basic French and Spanish and that, they just can't get their head around it.
And they wonder why people in England have literacy problems.
At least with the Chinese language, if it's Cantonese or it's Mandarin Chinese, the actual characters mean the same in both languages. Yet the actual words may mean something different. You know, it's actual the same words.
Right.
Yeah.
The character study. That's why they use the same characters down in Cantonese for Cantonese language as the Chinese.
Yeah. Look at legalese. Legalese is the language of the law society. So things that people believe to mean one thing can mean something completely different, like the word understand. Legalese is stand under.
Yeah.
So, you know, things like that. It's all abuse to control us in one way or another. It's all a form of abuse. That's the way I see it.
It's just a means and ways like making clauses and stuff like that, just to try and get out of things. They're all good with that, aren't they? They know what they're doing.
Aye. Definitely.
Right, are we wrapping it up, Paul? Are we done for your articles then?
Yes, that's it for my article. I thought I was going on a bit too much, so I cut it a wee bit short.
You want me to run through a couple of those things on that? Here are this, for example, on this article we found. I've done the one on OCD. The next one is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Some people use ADHD loosely to mean can't pay attention or concentrate. Others scoff at it as a way of prescribing pills to kids who just eat too much sugar. But it's a clinical condition, which means the real thing makes life a lot more difficult than it should be. DSM-5 is a list of 9 symptoms of inattentiveness and 9 of hyperactivity and impulsivity. To qualify for diagnosis, the person has to have at least 6 of one, 6 of the other, or 6 of each that have persisted for at least 6 months to a degree that is inconsistent with developmental level and the negatively impacts negatively impacts directly on social and academic occupational activities. Also, several of the symptoms have to have been present before age 12, and several have to be present in 2 or more settings. ADHD is a comparatively common diagnosis, and there are probably many mild cases of it that are never diagnosed. But getting bored when doing something most people find boring is, to use the terminology, not diagnostic. And then you've got narcissist, number 3, narcissist. It's common to use narcissist to mean vain or egomaniacal or self-obsessed. Oh my God, OMG millennials are such narcissists, always taking selfies. That politician is a narcissist, always taking credit for everything and needing his ego stroked. Much of this is just common reference to the mythological figure Narcissus, who spent so much time looking at his own reflection that he died. But there is a clinical diagnosis, narcissistic personality disorder, defined by DSM-5 as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration and lack of empathy beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. You need at least 5 of 9 characteristics to be diagnosed, including arrogance, exploitativeness, and a sense of entitlement. There are public figures who are thought by many to have these characteristics, but don't expect them ever to go in and be clinically assessed. Being self-centered isn't automatically NPD, and liking to take lots of selfies isn't diagnostic. Also, narcissistic traits may be particularly common in adolescence and do not necessarily indicate that that person will go on to have narcissistic personality disorder. Here are 4, manic depressive bipolar, stroke bipolar. Many people seem to think that bipolar disorder is having mood swings or up days and down days. Jimi Hendrix's song Manic Depression is about romantic uncertainty and its attendant emotional ups and downs, not quite something that could hospitalize you. Manic depressive and manic depression aren't technical terms anymore. The DSM-5 term is bipolar disorder, and it's a whole spectrum of disorders, all characterized by both major depressive episodes and manic episodes, and they don't last just a few hours or a day or two. Manic episodes involve abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive or irritable mood and persistently increased or goal-directed activity or energy lasting at least 1 week. This tends to include such things as extreme talkativeness, decreased need for sleep, racing thoughts, and risky behavior. Depressive episodes are not necessarily exactly the opposite in every way. The person may be agitated rather than lethargic, but they are generally the opposite and strongly so. Manic and depressive episodes resemble the happy and sad moods most of us have in about the same way an aircraft carrier resembles a yacht.
Well, Jeff, you might want to go and see a doctor after reading all that.
Definitely. 5, schizophrenia. Here we go. No, a lot of people that's been diagnosed with this. Some people think schizophrenia is multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder, when a person flips between different distinct personalities. But while the term schizophrenia comes from Greek for split mind, what it means is that different functions of the mind are dissociated from one another. There is quite a lot of variation in the symptoms of schizophrenia, but in order for it to be diagnosed according to the DSM-5, a person must have delusions, hallucinations, and or incoherent or frequently derailed speech, and may be catatonic, grossly disorganized, or lacking in emotional expression or volition. The symptoms have to last a long time, at least a month in full severity, and 6 months for associated signs. While many people have ideas from TV and movies of people with schizophrenia as psycho killers, the DSM-5 points out that the vast majority of people with schizophrenia are not aggressive and are more frequently victimized than are people in the general population. Number 6, paranoid. Paranoid is often used conversationally. Check, that's me. Paranoid is often used conversationally to mean just worried or self-conscious. And I'm paranoid that I have something stuck in my teeth. I'm paranoid when someone asks me to hold their baby like that, I'll drop it or it'll poop on me. I'm always paranoid at border crossings. This has little to do with the clinical version. Classically, paranoia was the original Greek catch-all term for mental illness from para, beside, and nous, mind. In other words, out of your mind. More recently, it's become a more specific diagnosis. Paranoid personality disorder in the DSM-5 sense means pervasive distrust and suspiciousness of others, such as their motives are interpreted as malevolent. This doesn't mean worrying too much that things will turn out badly. It means taking compliments as underhanded criticisms, viewing honest mistakes as maliciousness, and bearing grudges for a long time. In short, people with paranoid personality disorder don't just worry that people are out to get them, they're sure that they are, and they despise them for it. Number 7, psychotic. Psychotic is in popular use like an amped up version of crazy. People use it to describe people whose behavior or political beliefs seem wildly irrational. Check, that's me. Psychotic in the DSM-5 sense, on the other hand, is a broad term encompassing a number of different disorders, including schizophrenia. What they have in common are one or more of delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, speech, grossly disorganized or abnormal motor behavior, including catatonia, and negative symptoms. What they mean by negative symptoms is feeling less, saying less, doing less, and wanting to do less than is considered normal. In short, the difference between what many people use psychotic to mean and what it officially means is like the difference between I died laughing and a coroner's report. Psychopath. Number 8, psychopath. Psychopath is popularly used to mean someone who is dangerous and lacking in shame, remorse, or an appreciation of consequences.
Where's Boris?
Yeah, various disliked public figures regularly get called psychopaths. The DSM-5 doesn't use the term psychopath to refer to people. It avoids essentializing disorders. A person is not schizophrenic, but an individual with schizophrenia, but not an alcoholic, but an individual with alcohol use disorder. But it uses the term psychopathology quite a lot. That's because it's from Greek roots meaning mental illness, so it encompasses pretty much everything in the manual, not just conditions that involve remorseless cruelty. In other words, psychopath isn't a clinical term, and if it were one, we'd still be using it wrong. The way most people use it is just another way of saying nasty crazy, which is not clinical or, for that matter, particularly useful. Number 9, insane. Insane in the membrane. Right, here we go. The word insane is not used in the DSM-5 even once. Yes, it used to be used officially. It comes from Latin, meaning unhealthy, and at one time it was a dry clinical term, but its use got polluted by popular misperceptions and prejudices, sort of like psychopath, and for that matter, a number of other terms for mental illnesses. And finally, number 10, crazy. Unlike insane, the word crazy is actually used in the DSM-5. Not as a diagnostic or clinical term, of course. It's used to describe something that people with some kind of anxieties are afraid of becoming or being seen as. A person with social anxiety is worried about being judged as anxious, weak, crazy, stupid, boring, intimidating, dirty, or unlikable. A symptom of a panic attack is fear of going crazy. The manual explains that fear of going crazy is a colloquialism often used by individuals with panic attacks and is not intended as a pejorative or diagnostic term. Because, of course, that's how people in general use it, pejoratively. Crazy comes from the verb craze, which means crack up. Literally, crazed glass has a lot of small cracks. So a crazy person is metaphorically seen as all cracked up. We have in our culture a long history of derisive use of terms for mental diseases, just as we do for some kinds of physical diseases and disabilities. Leper, cripple. A word like crazy shows us how we tend to respond to mental illness with fear, meanness, or a desire to laugh it off. There you go. It's only a small article. That was it, basically. Thought that might be of interest to you.
Yeah,
well, I've got all of them.
And more.
Yeah, me too. We're all mad.
Listen, all of them words and meanings for the word crazy, all them words and meanings and that for the word insane.
Yeah.
Who writes this stuff down?
Well, you only know.
Who actually spends time to write this crap down? You know.
You're only normal if you're abnormal now, according to DSM.
We're all insane in the membrane.
Yeah, there's more important things to. Well, I would think, you know, making things and doing nice things and, you know, whatever than. I know they get paid well for craziness, for making shit up, basically. It's like these words today. I've never heard Islamophobia. What a ridiculous word that is. Scared of an ideology. Oh!
That's the great use of the word phobia. They use it in all sorts, and it drives me mad because, like you say, phobia is supposed to be a rational fear. Now, for example, if you're homophobic, for example, you may not like people who are homosexual, but it's not a fear at all. It's just that it's like Islamophobia or xenophobia. If you don't like foreigners, you get called a xenophobic. But how can you be xenophobic if it's an irrational fear? You just don't. You may just not like them, but they still call you xenophobic or something. It's ridiculous.
It's just like Marmite. Either you like it or you don't.
Exactly, and so and that word phobia gets abused so often because they don't realise what it actually means, and it means an irrational fear.
What about the word hate? Now that's quite a.
Oh yeah, we're supposed to be like, you know,
word nowadays. Hate. Hello, can we not use the word hate? Is hate taken out of the dictionary, Paul? Is that one that's been removed?
No, I think hate's still there, but hate's a real strong word.
I mean, nowadays, if you hate something, you're guilty of a hate crime, which is ridiculous because to me, I mean, love and hate, they're the opposites. They're polar opposites, aren't they? Love and hate. But they're just an extension of like and dislike in a way, because if you really like something, you love it. And if you really dislike something, you hate it. That's exactly. The way.
Yeah, they're trying to cut their vocabulary down in one area, yet building it up in other areas where they have redefined the words so they've got the narrative control.
Precisely that, Paul. Yeah, that's perfectly.
And don't forget all of these other things. You know, this ADHD, DDHD. You know, women today, they get rewarded financially for saying, and they feel like they've got a merit badge. Well, my son is ADHD, EDHD, AKNT, and he has special this and that. The only thing is, they're getting paid for that crap. They get more money on their benefits for that crap.
And this is what's pumping it all up.
Yeah, bollocks, isn't it?
It is a total bollocks stab. I got to agree, mate. It's they've just taken all.
Well, it is bollocks, but we've got to all live with it, and that's what we need to.
Sorry, what was that, PJ?
I said it is all bollocks, but at the same time, we have to live with it. Do you know what I mean? These families out there that do need support, and it's a sad shame to have to go begging to these sycophants that will come out with this sort of stuff for that support. Because they just make it so. They're making
I'm on about the words. I'm on about the words. The words that they're using, and people are going, well, actually, if I take my child along and he gets diagnosed with this word, I get X amount more money. Isn't that the truth?
I suppose that encourages.
But because they get the medication for the kids, whether it be Ritalin, which is like a cocaine. So it comes back to the drug pushing pharmacies again. They're hand in hand. It's like they're symbiotic with the pharmaceutical companies.
The way I see it, use their bullshit terms to get your benefit, which you totally are reliant on under the current system, and then take the medication and throw it in the bin.
Yeah, I think what would actually solve all of that, and I guess really for this case, it probably is a good idea, and that's if they have a universal basic income, and then they don't have to deal with these stupid words. Perhaps. I don't know.
But they've actually costed the universal benefit, and it's unaffordable.
Yeah, that figures.
Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends, doesn't it? What they well, is there a universal benefit for everybody on the planet, all the same?
It can't be so, can it? It can't be so.
No, it's right. So I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to shut up now. Thanks for all the information, Paul. And
yeah, talking about that.
Interesting. Very
talking about that universal basic income, isn't that where they give you everything all in one payment, and you've then responsible for paying your own rent and things like that? But yeah, if we're all psychiatrically deranged, then you know.
Yeah, how can we?
That's going to benefit the banking industry brilliantly, isn't it? Because everybody's going to be running themselves into debt, spending their rent payments on non-essential.
No, it's universal credit, Jeff. We covered the universal basic income together, did we not?
Oh yeah, universal yeah, I'm thinking of universal credit.
Yeah, the UBI is basically just a set amount that every individual gets. It don't matter whether you're rich or poor. Everybody will get it, and right. you don't have to work. You choose to work, but you're not forced to.
I mean, with universal credit, I think it's where they give you all your payments together,
yeah, that's the one.
Then to pay your rent and things.
But come along with those universal credits will be terms and conditions, which means if they want you somewhere to work, you've got to be there. It's a slavery thing again. It's a complete slavery.
It's like these bloody sanctions, Paul. I mean, we never used to have sanctions on your benefit. It was an entitlement that you used to get from paying into the system. You used to pay into the system, and then if you had a problem and you didn't have a job for a while, then you could claim your entitlement.
Well, that is, I'll tell you how crazy it is that they sanction you. Because of the sanctions, one day where it would have been a day I would have spent laid on my settee, not able to get off it, or wouldn't get off it, knowing that I'm going to fall or hurt myself or something, I was forced to go to a tribunal over my entitlements, right. And I ended up in hospital that day.
No, exactly. The upper one word you've just said, benefits and entitlements. There again, we can have a debate and a discussion just on them two words alone. But we're going to be going on all night. We've done an hour and 3/4 already on this. So are we ready to wrap up, Stav?
I just wanted to say one thing before we wrap it up. It used to be called entitlement, then it became called a supplementary benefit, and then it became called an allowance, and now it's called a benefit. Have you noticed how they've gradually changed it from entitlement to something like they're doing you a favour, when it's something that you've actually paid in for as a form of insurance, which you should be entitled to? That really annoys me.
Exactly.
We're going to credit you with benefits.
It's all manipulation of words.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, wrap it up then, Stav. We'll pass it over to you.
I learned a bit, especially about the gulags. And
hold on, Stav. You've just been chatting away and your microphone was muted. Start again.
Oh, well, did I not unmute it? Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Like I say, very, very interesting. I learned quite a bit tonight. And as I always do, my old mucker, you always bring up some good stuff. So really enjoyed it. Thanks very much. And you, Fred, thanks for coming on. And you, PJ, for running the show on the controls. So until next week. Next week, have a good rest of the weekend. Just a bit of news. Bitcoin's being hammered because they just brought our futures in, and the Wall Street are coming now. So the fun and games should start if you're following that side of things. And they're hammering it, which is.
And the 5 weeks for the PESCO, don't forget that.
And of course, we have this. We won't have an army anymore, will we? In 5 weeks' time, allegedly, because it's all going to be signed over to a drunk.
Oh, we will have an army. We'll just have an army that's against us. That's all.
It'll be run by the EU, won't it? The army.
A nation with no.
And that was that.
A
nation with.
Catch you next week.
What were you going to say then, Paul?
All right, cheers, boys. Thanks a lot.